This is the Seller Process Podcast, where we talk about the best systems, processes, and SOPs for your Amazon business so that you can regain control of your time, build up your team, and scale your e-com empire.
Hello, entrepreneurs. If you are growing your brand online successfully and you're now considering leveling up your game by expanding into brick-and-mortar stores, but you don't know where to start, then this episode is for you. Our guest today will share with us how to put ourselves in the shoes of a retail buyer so we can better understand the requirements to make our brand and products retail ready. I'm joined today by Kenji Gjovig, a retail and e-commerce digital executive. He has worked for some of the top retail companies, including Walmart, Albertsons Companies, and also on the brand side at Corsair. He has 17 years of experience in the industry and has helped numerous brands be successful in the brick-and-mortar environment. Hey, Kenji, how are you doing? Good to have you here.
Yeah. Hey, Gianmarco. Great to talk to you. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. So I think it's very interesting to have this conversation because for the first time, I'm talking with somebody who has a really lot of experience being a direct buyer of in a big company, right? So you were a buyer in Walmart and other big companies, right? So I'm very interested to hear your perspective on that, and so that let's start by putting ourselves in the shoes of a buyer, right? So now you are actually advising brands on how to sell in retail stores. So what are the elements that we should consider when we that a buyer look for to decide whether to place an order with us or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way I would suggest people think about it is that a brick and mortar buyer has to focus on the productivity of the assortment, right? So there is a fixed amount of shelf space for their category, and they have to make that as productive as possible. So when a buyer is considering a new brand or a set of SKUs, especially from an e-commerce only brand, they have to remove existing SKUs from their assortment to make room. So the key question that they have to ask themselves is, will this new brand replacing something else improve the overall productivity of my category sales, or will it be detrimental? Now, related to that is differentiation. So for example, if you manufacture a cutting board and there are several other cutting boards in the assortment at that particular retailer, maybe they have similar size, branding, material, quality, pricing, similar things like that, it's highly likely that that new brand is not going to stand out well. And so the buyer may be less interested. So you as a seller or a brand owner really need to find ways that your product and SKUs are going to be different on shelf than what that buyer already has on the shelf.
Okay, that's very interesting. So, and does that happen that maybe they just reduce the space of other products to put yours, or there's some removal, let's say, of a product or an existing product?
In general, for the most part, the physical shelf space, 4 or 8 feet linear space on a shelf is for the most part zero sum. From one lineup to the next one is in general going to be the same. So the buyer has to decide, if I'm going to put in a new SKU, I can't just kind of stick it in there. Something else has to go out. Now, if I'm removing something that was 12 inches wide and I'm putting something in that's 4 inches wide, then I could potentially have 3 different SKUs. And so you can kind of game the system a little bit, but not a lot. In general, you have to think about it as for every new item that goes on the shelf, something else has to come off. So you still have to be better than, what is coming off, or sort of better than the worst performing product in the category.
Okay. That's very interesting. So how can we find, what are the elements that the buyer consider when, making that decision? How will he know that the product will actually outperform an existing product?
So they're looking for a number of different factors. So for example, one is going to be your sales. So if you're selling in e-commerce only, for example, let's say you're on Amazon only, they want to know how you're doing on Amazon. Are you the top performing SKU or brand in that category? Are your sales really strong, et cetera? They're going to look at things like the user-generated content. So what is the star rating for your products, and what is the number of reviews that have been left? If those numbers are really good, then that's going to help. Another way to think about it is, how competitively intense is the category? Again, going back to my cutting board examples, if you're trying to sell to, let's say, a Walmart brick and mortar buyer, there are already thousands or certainly hundreds of cutting boards on Walmart.com. So they're choosing between the best ones that are in e-commerce. So you really have to be able to stand out some way. You need to be the best performing brand, for example, that's in their assortment or in some other assortment. So one basic way to do it is you need to be the best someplace, because a lot of these brick and mortar environments are well-established retailers. Walmart, for example, is a very high functioning retailer in terms of their processes and systems. So they can't do a lot of tests when there's high risk. So the buyers tend to make decisions that are based on really high likelihood of success. And if you're selling in e-commerce and you're a top performing brand in the category on e-commerce, you're much more likely to be chosen. But if you're kind of a mid-level brand within a category that's very crowded, you probably aren't going to have a chance in brick and mortar.
Okay, that makes sense. So what comes to my mind when you're saying that is that because I've been in sales for a long time, before in the past, and I always, created some sort of pitch deck in order to convince the buyer, right, to buy my products in previous companies I owned. So is it something that you think it would be helpful, or is it common to have, for example, like a pitch deck or something that lists all the good traits of the product, like as you said, the Amazon sales, the number of reviews, the differentiation? Is that something common? Like, would you recommend to create something like a pitch deck, or if not, what can help, to convince the buyer to choose our brand over an existing one?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, pretty much every supplier meeting I ever took, there was always a pitch, a deck of some sort, and typically they can email it to you, and oftentimes give you the printout with all the beautiful imagery and that sort of thing. So I would say a pitch deck is definitely important. Some of the elements you want to include in your pitch in the deck, you need to have things like maybe you've kind of diagrammed out the shelf and where you'd see your products and brands fitting on the shelf relative to others. Is it going to be at eye level, or do you want to have it lower? Especially in consideration with what else is on in the product category. You need to have very clear pricing, so they need to be able to look at a page and it has your catalog and assortment, and what the pricing is, what the barcodes are and the UPCs and that sort of thing, so they can just clearly have all the information. The dimensions and such, because they need to be thinking about, if they're going to add it to the shelf, is it, what do they have to remove in order to make physical room for that product? The other thing I would suggest is data. So any data you have on the performance of your products, they're going to want to look at that. Back to what I was saying about, how it's performing on Amazon. If you can show you're doing $40 million on Amazon or whatever, that's pretty impressive. And so that's going to help. If you're doing only $200,000 a year on Amazon, they may not think that you're ready for a big major brick and mortar environment. Now, maybe that brand is ready for a specialty retailer or something like that. So it depends on a lot of things. But as much performance data as you can. Now, I also came from a consumable category, and so there was a lot of data like Nielsen and IRI, kind of these panel data or other data. So if you have any industry data, market share data, NPD, for example, or Numerator, or other data sources that can show how your brand is doing in terms of size, market share, growth, any of that data, user-generated content, as we talked about, any of that data that helps you tell your story, that's all going to be relevant to a buyer. And increasingly, brick and mortar buyers are now omni-channel buyers. And so they are starting to speak more of the e-commerce language. So if you're talking about ratings and reviews, 10 years ago, they may not have really understood what that meant, but now they really do. And so you can start including e-commerce metrics into the presentation as well.
Okay. That's very interesting. All right. That's cool. Okay. So let's start, with understanding better the process that an e-commerce seller should make to expand into brick and mortar? What are the main steps? Walk us through the typical path that we should follow. Maybe you can give also an example of a case study or something that your clients have been going through.
Yeah, sure. So stability in e-commerce first. So you really need to be stable in terms of your supply chain and your pricing and your advertising and such. If you're trying to expand into brick and mortar and you don't have things really humming in e-commerce, then maybe you need to focus on getting things straight first. Secondly is sales, right? As we talked about, you really want to be the number one brand or the number one or two brand in an e-commerce environment in order to go to brick and mortar. So getting some really solid sales performance, I think, is really important.
Do you have a number in mind? Just sorry to interrupt. Do you have a number in mind? Like, for example, you think above 1 million, 3 million, what do you think it's kind of a good number to present to a retailer?
I think it does depend. I may say it depends a lot on some of the answers to your questions, but it depends on a number of things. If you're planning to present to a major retailer like a Walmart, and you only do $1 million in your total portfolio and all customers, maybe Amazon, for example, that's probably too small because they probably are not willing to take a big risk on such a small player. And there's probably not enough data to show that they should take that risk. So in general, they would like to see it more proven. We've worked with some suppliers that are $40 million on Amazon only, and they're ready to go to the majors, Walmart, Target, Costco, for example. Now, in other categories, maybe it's like gymnastics apparel. And so by definition, it's a more niche category. Now, there you're not going to the Walmarts of the world. You're going to maybe Dick's Sporting Goods or, more of a specialty retailer. And so, for those brick and mortar environments, you don't necessarily have to be, in the millions for that because, they're looking for newness and differentiation, that sort of thing. So it kind of does depend on the category in which retailers you're targeting. But I would definitely say that the buyer is going to wants to know some information about your sales.
Got it. Okay, cool. Let's move on. You were mentioning, there was a third.
Yeah, just a few other things I'll just kind of quickly list. So you should have financing available because if you do get lucky and the buyer is ready to give you a purchase order, you want to be able to fulfill that and not have any issues. So have your financing ready. You don't necessarily need to talk to them about it. They're going to assume that, but you need to know how you're going to finance the inventory. Packaging, you have to have retail ready packaging, and we can talk about that more. It can't just be frustration-free packaging. You might consider having different SKUs, maybe a different assortment for brick and mortar compared to e-commerce. You really should know that retailer's ecosystem really well. So just as a quick example of here, when I was a buyer at Sam's Club in the grocery division, I would have suppliers come to pitch me their grocery products. And the first question I would ask them is, what are your insights? What did you observe when you walk my category at a Sam's Club? And if they hadn't, they immediately looked very embarrassed because it showed that they didn't do the basic preparation of walking that category to see what's on the shelf. So you really need to know what's on the shelf, what are the displays and end caps, what is that retailer or that category trying to stand for? Is it all about high price points and high quality, or is it more about everyday consumables? You want to understand what that story is being told. Now, understanding the retailer ecosystem can stretch to things like, what is their pricing strategy? Is it high-low versus kind of an everyday low cost, everyday low price? You want to understand like supplier agreements and payment terms and things of that nature. So the more you know about that retailer's ecosystem, the better off you're going to be. And again, differentiation. So I can't harp on this more than I am, but you need to have clear differentiation. You need to be able to tell the buyer why your product is both different, but also better than the products that he or she has on the shelf in existence today. Because again, they're going to have to remove something from the assortment. And so you need to be able to tell a story as to why yours will perform better. Pricing, quality, form factor, whatever the reasoning is, how it's different and better, you have to have that story very crisp.
Right. Okay, makes sense. And that actually ties well with my next question. Like, do you think we should sell the same products that we sell already online, or we should create like specific SKUs just for retail, because they might have different packaging or we might have or different maybe pack size or something? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so again, it depends, not to overplay that, but I've seen it done both ways and it can be successful either way. So I'll just kind of talk about a few things. So the safest way is to have different assortment, because then, Amazon won't be upset. You won't have issues with pricing and competition from one retailer to the next, because the price scrapers can't identify, the same kind of functional SKU, but two different barcodes, for example. So, that is safer. However, I get that it's much more complex and expensive to have new separate packaging and that sort of thing. So I know that there's sort of different ways to think about it. I will say this, at the very least, you have to have retail ready, kind of beautiful packaging. Your product has to stand alone on the shelf. So if you're selling to Amazon and all you have is frustration-free packaging, just the brown box, then you definitely have to have different packaging for retail. I think it also depends on the size and the category that you're in. For example, the brand I was mentioning earlier, we have a client that is $40 million in personal care on Amazon alone. They are taking it very safe and cautious and having a totally separate assortment. They're very dependent on Amazon, which is huge, and they don't want to put that at risk at all. And so they've developed their entire separate line of products. In a lot of cases, they're very similar, if not identical products, just different barcodes and packaging. In some cases, they have different specifications, so they can have truly differentiated examples. We have other clients, again, gymnastics apparel or, kind of small niche players that Amazon is not going to pay quite as close attention to them. And so it's much easier for a smaller seller in that, or a small brand owner, to just have the same exact SKUs and assortment that they sell both in brick and mortar and e-commerce. So it does depend on a number of things.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. All right. And I'm curious to understand, what's the strategy to start? Let's say we figured out that we are retail ready, we have financing, we have, products ready to go with beautiful packaging, which, by the way, I would suggest to have it anyway like that, even when selling on Amazon, because it definitely drives, better reviews and so on. But that's another topic. Then I'm curious to understand, what is the strategy to start contacting and approaching new buyers? Should we kind of start small with small retailers and then go up and up, pitching bigger and bigger retailers, or go directly to the big ones? What's the strategy?
Yeah, again, it does depend, but I think in general it is more safe to be able to start smaller, for a couple of reasons. Number one, because then you can manage that, right? And so you're not biting off more than you can chew. And I think that's really important, because I've seen examples in my career where a brand tried to expand too quickly, and then they had fulfillment issues or something, broke in the process. And then they really put the retailer in a bad situation, and they never got a second chance. That retailer is not going to give them a second chance when they screwed it up, because then they have a big hole in the assortment that they can't fill. So, and it's too difficult to find another backfilling brand to come in and that sort of thing. So you definitely don't want to overextend yourself. So starting small is definitely a good idea. It does depend, though, on your size. So again, we have some clients that are in the tens of millions of dollars on Amazon, and they're in a kind of core SKU that is in a lot of the majors, like Walmart, Target, Costco, and Sam's Club. And so they really have tuned their supply chain and their products, and they really know how to sell at scale. And so they're ready to go. They also, in this case, have very clear differentiation. So they know how to tell their story to be able to say, here's why our products and brands fit well on the shelf with your customer. And that's the important thing, is you have to know who the buyer's customers are. Here's why it fits well. And there are definitely some brands that go directly to a big major retailer like a Walmart or Target. We also have our particular business does tend to work with smaller suppliers, a lot of e-commerce only suppliers that are starting to make the switch to brick and mortar. And so in that case, they typically tend to start small, either because they are small or maybe because their products are more niche. And so again, like gymnastics apparel, you're not going to be in a mainstream retailer. Maybe it's a mall-based apparel store, or maybe some sporting goods stores in a particular part of the store. So in those cases, you're going to be starting small just by nature of it. So it does depend. Starting small is always safer, but if you're ready to go, you can go bigger depending on the category you're in.
Right. Okay. 100% agree. Okay. Then, let's talk about the wholesale prices, because that's kind of a hot our topic, many people think that selling wholesale has lower margins, and that's actually the opposite of my experience so far. I haven't done so much in wholesale, but my brand already, we sold a few orders to wholesale buyers, and the margins were much higher because we negotiated good prices, and we didn't have all the Amazon fees and so on. So what is your take on that? How do we set the wholesale prices in a way that it's convenient for both ends? Obviously the retailer needs to put a markup and sell it to the next buyer, and we also need our margin. So how do we set wholesale prices properly?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to your point, you don't have the Amazon, the FBA fees, for example, if you're selling into brick and mortar. I mean, another way to think about it is, when I was at Sam's Club, which is a warehouse club environment, suppliers are shipping pallet quantities. So it's incredibly efficient to have, the trucks go to the fulfillment or the distribution center and they just get cross-docked. The entire pallet goes from the supplier's truck to Sam's Club's truck. And so there's not a lot of handling and that sort of thing. So the costs in the supply chain are much lower. So in that case, everyone can have kind of a lower margin structure because the volume is so much higher. So to me, that's the kind of the name of the game, is what is the sort of productivity of the SKUs. So a few ways to think about it. It does depend on the retailer. So for example, if you're working with a retailer that is in a specialty category, or if they have slotting fees or programs where you're gonna price it really high and they're gonna have really aggressive promotions for kind of a high-low sort of thing, then you're gonna need to give the retailer higher margins than if you're working with like a Walmart or Target, which typically operate on kind of what they call EDLC, EDLP, everyday low cost, everyday low price, where it's possible that in grocery, for example, an individual item that's on heavy promotion will be lower than the equivalent item at Walmart, but the overall basket of goods is highly likely to be much cheaper at Walmart because everything overall on average is lower. So the margin structure for Walmart is going to be lower than, for example, grocery. On the other hand, if you sell in a specialty environment, typically their margin requirements are going to be higher than that. So a rule of thumb might be, for certain categories, maybe a mass retailer is going to look at a 30% margin, and it's going to be up or down based on that. Club will be lower. Other channels, drug or specialty, is going to be a little bit higher, for example. There were times when I was at Sam's Club where I literally ran a 6% gross margin on some commodity categories. Spices were dramatically higher than that. So even within one product category, there can be pretty significant differences. One way to think about it is the productivity. So if you have very high SKU productivity, so pallets and pallets of milk going out the door in a club, then the margin on individual products is going to be lower because you make it up on the volume. Lower productivity, so a specialty retailer where the volume that goes out the door is not as high as a mass retailer, then the margin requirements have to be higher because they have to make it up somehow. So that's kind of one way to think about it, is kind of a sliding scale, if you will, based on the overall productivity of the SKUs in the assortment.
Right. Okay. And do you think we can kind of set wholesale prices in tiers? Like, for example, if the buyer orders more, we'll give a better discount. Is that a common thing, or they all always want to deal with one price that it's equal for in any case?
I've definitely seen it both ways, and I would say the smaller the company, the more simple your pricing catalog should be. When I was working with very large, kind of blue chip suppliers, they definitely, not visible to me, but I could definitely tell they had all kinds of tiers. If you buy this much, then the price per unit is this. And if you can buy more, it's going to be some other number. Sometimes there are also volume rebates. And so on a percent of sales. And so the more I bought, then I got more profit coming into the door that way. And so there are lots of different ways to think about it. But at some point, at some sophistication, there should definitely be tiers. Again, thinking about, selling pallet quantities to a club is very different than selling case quantities to Walmart and selling, a few eaches here and there to a specialty retailer. So brands definitely need to be thinking about pricing tiers based on the overall kind of category of retailers that they're selling to.
Right. Okay. Okay. Interesting. And speaking about optimizing supply chain that you mentioned before, it's a game of productivity, basically, as you said. So, what I'm thinking, one of the main challenges that brands might have in starting to sell to brick and mortar stores is that they might not know, what quantities they're going to sell. So it's kind of difficult to predict inventory. So, is it something possible for brands to, for example, keep the stock maybe ready in China, wherever their factory is, and then will the buyers be willing to wait for the order to come, or should we always have a certain amount of stock available in the US, right, ready to be shipped? What's your take on that?
The short answer is you can never be late. So when the buyer says you have to be in store or in the distribution center by this date, you have to hit that. And therefore you as the brand have to do whatever it takes to do that. If you have to pre-position inventory in North America so that way it's ready to go and you just have to put it on a truck from one warehouse to the retailer's distribution center, then that's what you have to do. Now, that being said, you'll typically have some lead time on that. So for example, if you're selling in a seasonal category, Christmas trees, for example, the buyer is making that decision in February or March of that year. And so if you're getting a purchase order, typically you're getting the purchase order well in advance of the manufacturing. So you get the purchase order, you know exactly how much they're ordering and no more, right? Because you're not going to be doing a lot of manufacturing during the season because the time to get across the ocean is too long. So you're getting an order and then you have time to manufacture it and then ship it. And at that point, you probably want to pre-position it. I think the trick is going to be when it's an everyday item. So you still want to be able to get it pre-positioned to the States in time so that when the new layout hits and your product has to be there, then you're ready to go. But then you'll be able to kind of assess the supply chain and sort of let it smooth out. I would say err on the side of having inventory closer to shore, because again, you can never be late. So it sometimes, especially initially, as you're trying to figure out the ebbs and flows of the supply chain and the volume, the seasonality, you may want to load up a little bit up front to make sure you have enough holding capacity for that. And then as you really figure that out, then you can kind of streamline it and bring some of the inventory down. But you can never be late. You have to get there on time and in full.
Okay, that's good to know. Interesting. Another aspect that people might, complain about, let's say, when talking about retail, is the payment terms. It's something maybe some people don't understand fully. So, what are the most common payment terms, and that happens usually in retail stores?
I see typically 30 days. I've seen things like 60 days, 90 days. I think at one point I even saw 120 days, or maybe that was an attempt to get 120 days. I would say that this is very negotiable. So one thing for brands to know is that this is not a fixed thing. Now, the retailer, the buyer is going to maybe act like it is. Well, this is our policy. It's 90 days. But it's not really their policy. That may be their entering position in a negotiation, but you always have the ability to negotiate back to them. And also, when I was a buyer, I had some sympathy for small suppliers because I knew that 90-day payment terms could be really challenging for their finances if they weren't going to get paid until months after I placed the order. So at some point, I, as a retailer, don't want to put my suppliers in jeopardy of maybe going bankrupt or defaulting on their loans. So it is kind of a partnership at some level. But I would say that if you're a brand, you definitely want to negotiate hard on this one because, getting cash in the door matters a lot, especially if you're going to have to manufacture a big purchase order and you're going to have a lot of that shipping out long before you get paid. You want to have that as short as possible. So I would negotiate hard and just say, I can't do this unless it's 30 days. We don't have the financial sort of ability to withstand longer lead times, but I can do it at 30 days, for example.
Okay, and yeah, that's very interesting. All right, so I think we covered most of the points that I wanted to cover with you. All the steps that e-commerce sellers should take into consideration when expanding into retail stores. Obviously, it's something they could do. They could try out even by themselves, but it's a very daunting task and very time consuming, and it requires a lot of experience. So, in case they are interested, like, how can you help them and share with people your contacts, and what can you do with them to help brands start expanding in retail stores?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I work for a company called Brands 10X. Brands 10X is actually part of AI Commerce, which is an e-commerce agency. So Brands 10X, the portion that I work for, is really the brick and mortar arm of that. So what I would say is we really understand e-commerce well. Personally, I've worked in the e-commerce industry for 10 years before or after my time as a brick and mortar buyer. And Brands 10X does a couple of things. We are focused on helping e-commerce suppliers shift to brick and mortar. Broadly speaking, there are two offerings we have. One is retail training. So we teach suppliers how to be ready to sell to brick and mortar. We have a master class on a learning management system that's on demand. And so they can sign up and take the class at their own pace and really understand all the different things like pricing and packaging and phone numbers on the website and user-generated content that a buyer is going to look at and those sort of things. So we have a class that we have available for our clients. And the second thing is a service offering of retail placement. So for brands that have all this stuff ready to go, but they just don't have the people or the knowledge to actually call on that retailer, we do that as a service offering. And so we've got a network of brokers and manufacturers reps that are in-house that we can get into individual retailer ecosystems, whether it's something like Kohl's in kind of the apparel department store genre, or food and grocery or mass retail or whatever it is. We've placed products in lots of different retailers. And so we actually will help you build the pitch and do the research analysis. We'll give the pitch for you or with you. We'll then, get the purchase orders, help you fulfill them, and kind of keep you moving through the system and kind of managing your account as a outsourced account manager. So we do kind of both training with a master class to get suppliers ready. And we actually have the service offering to actually get them as their concierge through a retailer ecosystem.
Awesome. Okay, sounds great. Thank you very much, Kenji, again, for coming to the show and sharing your knowledge. It was very helpful and insightful. So yeah, thank you again. We may have some other calls in the future with, diving into other aspects.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah, my
great.
pleasure. And one more thing I'd mention is that we do have a specific promotion that we're offering for your listeners. So if anybody wants to sign up for our class, they can put in at checkout the promo code TSP for your podcast, and they'll get a $500 discount, which is a 20% discount on the price of the class. So we're happy to be partnered with you, and we'd love to get your listeners a discount on our services. So put in TSP at checkout, and you get a $500 discount.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And so, guys, you remember that in every episode, there is always some complimentary material that you can download. So you can go to thesellerprocess.com and find this episode show notes, and you will be able to download some slides that Kenji put together with more information about the things we discussed today. So remember to check that out. You can find it in our website, thesellerprocess.com, or in the description of the YouTube video. And as always, guys, remember the key to success is to emulate the best. So take home the insights that you just learned today from Kenji and apply to your business and see it growing. Try to approach the first few buyers and expand your business into retail stores. And I hope you like the content of this episode. Put a like, subscribe to the channel, and I hope you will have a productive week, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. Hey, entrepreneurs, I hope you enjoyed the episode and learned something from the interview. If you're serious about creating systems for your business, automating processes, and building up your team so that you can transfer the tedious daily tasks in order to focus on more high-level strategic tasks and work on your business and not in your business, I've created a guide for Amazon sellers named Capturing Systems and Creating SOPs that you can find at thesellerprocess.com/systems ebook, where you will learn how to leverage systems and SOPs in your Amazon business so that you can accomplish more by working less, optimize your time, automate and delegate tasks, and reap the benefits of being a true business owner and not simply an operator in your own business. Go download the ebook at thesellerprocess.com/systems ebook and start implementing all the tips and insights that I share with you. And leave us a review or a comment to let us know how the content we are sharing here is making an impact in your business. And have a productive week.